For the past few weeks, life had been nothing but work, responsibilities, and endless distractions. Every day felt the same, and fishing had slowly been pushed aside. But deep down, I knew I needed to get back to the water. I needed a break from everything. So when I finally found a few free days, I packed my gear, loaded my equipment, and headed toward a remote river that local anglers claimed was home to giant grass carp. This wasn't just another fishing trip. I wanted an adventure. I wanted a challenge. Most of all, I wanted to hook into a fish that would make every minute worthwhile. The afternoon before the trip officially began, I arrived at the river to prepare my spot. The location looked incredibly promising. A wide stretch of water flowed through a deep channel, bordered by thick vegetation and overhanging trees. The current was gentle and the area felt untouched. It was exactly the type of place where large fish could spend their days feeding and hiding. I carefully scattered fermented corn throughout the area, creating a large feeding zone that would hopefully attract fish overnight. The smell drifted through the warm evening air as I finished my preparations. Looking across the river, I couldn't help imagining what might be swimming beneath the surface. Somewhere out there, a giant fish could already be moving toward my bait. Before sunrise the next morning, I was back at the water. A thin layer of mist floated above the river, and the world felt completely silent. It was the kind of morning every angler dreams about. The conditions seemed perfect. I prepared my rig, hooked several kernels of corn onto the line, and cast directly onto the spot I had baited the day before. Then I waited. 1 hour passed. Nothing happened. 2 hours passed. Still nothing. The float remained perfectly motionless. Occasionally, tiny ripples appeared around the bait, suggesting that smaller fish were investigating it. But there was no sign of the giant carp I had come to find. As the morning turned into afternoon, the heat became intense. Sweat ran down my face while the sun beat relentlessly onto the river. Yet I refused to move. Big fish are famous for testing an angler's patience, and I wasn't about to quit early. By evening, however, I had absolutely nothing to show for my efforts. The river had defeated me on day one. Most people would have packed up and gone home, but I wasn't ready to surrender. Nearby stood an old tower overlooking the river, and I decided to spend the night there rather than waste time traveling back and forth. As darkness settled in, I climbed to one of the upper levels. The view was incredible. Moonlight reflected across the river's surface, creating a silver path that disappeared into the distance. A cool breeze flowed through the structure, making the night surprisingly comfortable despite the heat of the day. I lay there staring out across the water. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, fish were moving through the darkness. Tomorrow would be different, at least. That's what I kept telling myself. The second morning began with a small burst of excitement. When I returned to my baited area, I immediately noticed signs that something had been feeding overnight. Some of the bait was gone. My heart started racing. Maybe the carp had finally arrived. But after a closer inspection, reality quickly set in. The missing bait was almost certainly eaten by tilapia. Small fish had once again beaten me to the punch. Frustrated but determined, I decided to change my strategy completely. I adjusted my bait presentation and switched to a setup that I hoped would discourage smaller fish while appealing to larger targets. The cast landed perfectly. Seconds later, the float twitched, then it moved, then it suddenly shot sideways. I instantly grabbed the rod. The line tightened hard. For a brief moment, pure adrenaline exploded through my body. This was the opportunity. I had been waiting for the rod. Bent the fish pulled and then everything went slack. The fish was gone. I couldn't believe it. After nearly 2 days of waiting, I had finally hooked something substantial, only to lose it within seconds. I stood there staring at the water in complete disbelief. The river returned to silence. The chance had vanished. The remainder of the day felt endless. Temperatures climbed above 36 degrees Celsius. The air felt heavy and oppressive. Even the smaller fish seemed unwilling to feed. Hours passed without a single bite. Fortunately, I had brought a portable power station along with a small electric cooker. Sitting beside the river, I prepared a hot meal, while a small fan blew cool air toward me. At that moment, surrounded by nature and miles away from everyday stress. I remembered why I loved fishing so much. Not every trip is about catching fish. Sometimes it's about escaping reality. Sometimes it's about the journey itself. The third day began with something completely unexpected. While traveling to the river before sunrise, I noticed a man lying beside the road after a motorcycle accident. Blood covered part of his head and he appeared disoriented. I immediately stopped and rushed over to help. After checking on him, I called emergency services and stayed by his side until he regained consciousness. Thankfully, he eventually woke up, despite our concerns. He refused medical treatment and insisted on leaving. Watching him ride away left me uneasy. When I finally reached the river, another troubling sight greeted me. Dead fish floated along the shoreline. Others drifted near the surface. The water carried a foul smell. Something was clearly wrong. Suddenly, the poor fishing made much more sense. If water quality had deteriorated, many fish could have left the area entirely. For the first time during the trip, I seriously considered giving up. 3 days of effort, 3 days of heat, 3 days of frustration. Maybe the river simply wasn't going to reward me. Still, I stayed. I needed one final answer before leaving. As evening approached, golden sunlight stretched across the water. The river looked beautiful despite all the challenges it had thrown at me. Then, without warning, everything changed. The float disappeared. Beneath the surface, not a gentle bite, not a small nibble, it vanished. Instantly, I lunged for the rod and struck hard. The reel screamed. Water exploded across the surface. Finally, a real fish. The battle was on. The fish surged through the river with incredible power. Every run tested my equipment. Every turn forced me to stay focused. After days of disappointment, my heart pounded harder than ever, minute after minute. The fight continued. Then a large shape appeared beneath the surface. It wasn't the giant grass carp I had imagined. It wasn't a common carp either. Instead, it was a massive red pacu. At that moment, none of that mattered. I laughed out loud. 3 exhausting days. 1 lost fish. Countless casts, relentless heat. And finally, success. As darkness settled over the river for the final time, I packed my gear and prepared for the journey home. Looking back across the water, I realized that fishing has never been about numbers. It's about perseverance, adventure, and those unforgettable moments that make every struggle worthwhile. I came searching for a giant grass carp. I never found one. But I left with something even better, a story I will never forget.